Welcome, everyone, to the EMT Spots Blood Pressure Podcast. I'm Samuel Harrison, and with me today, as always, is the fantastic Olivia Harper. Now, today we're diving into a health concern that's got a pretty scary nickname. It's often called the silent killer. We're talking about high blood pressure, and it's something that affects a staggering number of people, almost half of all adults in the U.S. And the scariest part, many don't even realize they have it.
That's right. It's fascinating, and a little unnerving. High blood pressure often doesn't show any noticeable symptoms. Most people feel completely fine. That's why these regular blood pressure checks are so important. You can get them done at your doctor's office, at a pharmacy, even at home these days.
It is alarming, though, isn't it? 1 in 3 adults with high blood pressure, and they're completely unaware of their condition, really drives home the point about those regular checkups.
Absolutely. But it's also important to remember not all high readings are a cause for concern. Sometimes, you get a little anxious being at the doctor's office, and that can actually cause your blood pressure to jump up temporarily. It's what we call white coat syndrome. And if it's not recognized, it can actually lead to a misdiagnosis.
Oh, I've definitely experienced white coat syndrome myself a few times. It's amazing, isn't it, how much our mental state can impact our physical health.
It really is. And then, on the flip side, you have something called pseudohypertension. It's more common in older adults.
Hmm.
What happens is the arteries stiffen up, and that can lead to high readings, even if their actual blood pressure isn't elevated.
So it's not always as simple as just getting a reading then, is it? Sounds
Mhm.
like healthcare providers really need to take all these factors into account to make sure they're getting an accurate picture.
You got it. Accurate measurement and careful interpretation. Those are key to making sure we're treating the right thing, not just a misleading reading.
Now, here's something that I found pretty surprising. High blood pressure isn't just a problem for older adults. Nearly 1 in 4 adults between 20 and 44, they also have high blood pressure.
Yeah, that's a worrying trend for sure. Likely linked to things like rising rates of obesity, high cholesterol, and type 2 diabetes, all becoming much more common in younger demographics, really highlights the need to think about preventative measures and healthy choices early on.
It is concerning, isn't it, to think about those long-term implications of high blood pressure at a young age. One article I read even suggested a possible link to dementia later in life. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, that's definitely an area of ongoing research. It's not a direct cause and effect, but there is some evidence suggesting a connection between an uncontrolled high blood pressure during midlife, we're talking roughly between 44 and 66 years old, and a higher risk of developing dementia later on. It's certainly something to keep in mind and something to chat with your doctor about.
It seems like women and African Americans in particular face unique risks when it comes to high blood pressure.
That's right. For women, high blood pressure can cause complications during pregnancy. And certain types of birth control can increase the risk as well. Then you have African Americans. They tend to have higher rates of high blood pressure than other groups, likely because of a few things combined: genetic predisposition, socioeconomic disparities, and certain lifestyle factors, too. Addressing that disparity, it really needs a multifaceted approach.
Paints a bit of a sobering picture, doesn't it? But the good news is, high blood pressure is both preventable and treatable.
Absolutely. And there are a lot of positive steps you can take. Lifestyle changes are huge. A healthy diet with lots of fruit, vegetables, and whole grains, maintaining a healthy weight, regular exercise, avoiding smoking, and not drinking too much alcohol. All of these things can make a huge difference.
Those are fantastic tips for overall health, too, aren't they? Not just for blood pressure.
Yeah. Exactly. Many of these lifestyle changes have a ripple effect. They benefit your heart, your brain, your overall well-being. It's a win-win all around. And of course, working with your doctor to create a personalized plan is really important. They can assess your individual needs, look at your medical history, recommend the best course of action for you.
Now, I came across something called labile hypertension. Sounds a bit unpredictable. What exactly is that?
So labile hypertension, that's when you have unexpected fluctuations in your blood pressure. These fluctuations can be triggered by a number of things: stress, caffeine, how much salt you eat, anxiety, even underlying medical conditions, like something called baroflex failure, which affects your body's blood pressure regulation system.
We've talked about how uncontrolled high blood pressure can be dangerous. But do these dramatic swings in blood pressure, do they pose additional risks?
It's a good question, and it's definitely a valid concern. But labile hypertension doesn't always require specific medical treatments. Managing anxiety can often help regulate those fluctuations, maybe through therapy or lifestyle changes.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
It sounds like a lot of those same strategies that help prevent and manage high blood pressure in general, they apply to labile hypertension too.
You're absolutely right. It all comes back to those healthy lifestyle choices we were talking about. Managing your stress levels, eating a healthy diet, staying active, avoiding things like tobacco and too much alcohol. You can really reduce your risk of developing high blood pressure and its complications.
It really is amazing how interconnected our health is. Olivia, this has been so informative. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us today.
Always a pleasure to join you on these deep dives, Samuel. I love exploring these complex topics in a way that's informative and engaging for everyone listening.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the end of part one of our three-part deep dive into blood pressure. We've covered so much ground already, but there's still so much more to explore. Join us for part two, where we'll delve even deeper into the world of blood pressure regulation, genetics, and the latest advancements in treatment options. Welcome back to the TheEMTSpot's Blood Pressure Podcast. We're continuing our deep dive into the world of blood pressure. In part one, we talked about how common high blood pressure is, and we touched on some of the risks. Now I'm really curious to learn more about how our bodies actually regulate blood pressure. Seems like a pretty complex system.
Oh, it definitely is. It's a dynamic interplay of many factors. Your nervous system, your hormones, even your kidneys. They all work together to keep things in balance. One of the most important players is the autonomic nervous system. It controls lots of automatic functions, like your heart rate and how much your blood vessels constrict.
So when we're in a stressful situation, what's actually happening in our bodies to affect our blood pressure?
Well, in those moments, your sympathetic nervous system kicks in. It releases hormones like adrenaline, and that causes your heart to beat faster and your blood vessels to narrow, which leads to a temporary spike in blood pressure. It's the classic fight or flight response, helps us deal with threats.
Makes sense that our bodies would have something like that? A way to adapt quickly to stress. But then what happens when the stress is gone?
Then the parasympathetic nervous system steps in. It calms everything down, brings your heart rate and blood pressure back to their normal range. It's a constant balancing act, really.
It's fascinating how our bodies can do that. Switch gears so seamlessly. So we've talked about the nervous system. What about the kidneys? What role do they play in blood pressure regulation?
The kidneys are crucial for long-term blood pressure control. They regulate the amount of fluid and salt in your body. So when your blood pressure is high, your kidneys try to lower it by getting rid of extra fluid and salt through your urine.
So it's not just about how fast your heart is beating, it's about managing fluid too.
Exactly. And of course, hormones are involved too. Hormones like aldosterone and antidiuretic hormone, they influence how much fluid your kidneys hold on to, which helps fine-tune your blood pressure even more.
It's amazing how it all works together. You mentioned genetics earlier. How much of an impact do our genes have on our risk of developing high blood pressure?
Genetics definitely play a role. If high blood pressure runs in your family, you might be more likely to develop it yourself. Researchers have found specific genes that affect blood pressure regulation, but it's not just one gene, it's a whole bunch of them interacting. And environmental factors play a role too.
So even if you have a genetic predisposition, lifestyle choices can still make a difference.
Absolutely. You can't change your genes, but you can change how they affect you. A healthy lifestyle can really help reduce those genetic risks.
That's good to know. Let's shift gears a bit and talk about treatment. What are some of the latest advancements in managing high blood pressure?
Well, besides those lifestyle changes we keep talking about, there are a lot of medications that can help control blood pressure. These medications work in different ways. Some relax the blood vessels, some reduce fluid volume, some slow down your heart rate. Your doctor can help you figure out what's best for you. Which medication, or maybe a combination of medications.
It's amazing how medicine has progressed to be able to develop such targeted treatments.
Yeah.
Are there any new approaches being explored besides medications, I mean?
There's definitely growing interest in what we call non-pharmacological interventions, like device-based therapies. One example is renal denervation. It's a minimally invasive procedure that targets nerves in the kidneys, the nerves involved in blood pressure regulation. It's a pretty new area, but early studies are looking promising, especially for patients who haven't responded well to medication.
Wow, it's really interesting. Sounds very precise and targeted. We've talked about treatment. But what about preventing high blood pressure in the first place?
Prevention is always the best approach. And it really comes down to those healthy habits we've been discussing. Maintaining a healthy weight, getting regular exercise, a balanced diet with lots of fruits, veggies, and whole grains, limiting salt intake, and avoiding smoking and too much alcohol. All of those things are super important.
Sounds a lot like the advice we hear for overall good health.
You're right. Taking care of your body in a holistic way is the best way to prevent all sorts of health problems, and that includes high blood pressure. It's all about making those sustainable changes that you can stick with for the long haul.
It's about those gradual changes that become part of your routine.
Exactly. And don't forget about those regular checkups with your doctor. They can keep an eye on your blood pressure, assess your risk factors, and help you stay on track with your health goals.
It's like having a personal health coach in your corner.
I like that. And remember, knowledge is power. The more you understand about blood pressure and the things that affect it, the better choices you can make for your health.
This has been another eye-opening conversation, Olivia. I'm already looking forward to our final part, where we'll explore the connection between blood pressure and our mental well-being.
Me too, Samuel. That's a really important topic, and one that doesn't get enough attention.
Until then, listeners, stay curious and stay healthy. We'll be back soon with the final part of our blood pressure deep dive. Welcome back to the TheEMTSpot's Blood Pressure Podcast for our final part of this deep dive into blood pressure. I'm Samuel Harrison, and I'm delighted to have Olivia Harper back with us. In the first two parts, we talked about how common high blood pressure is, the risks involved, how our bodies try to regulate it, and even some of the latest treatment options. But Olivia, there's one thing we haven't really touched on yet, and that's the link between blood pressure and our mental and emotional well-being. It's not something we often think about, but I have a feeling it's a really important piece of the puzzle.
Oh, absolutely, Samuel. The connection between our mental health and our cardiovascular health, it's a fascinating area of research, and it's getting more and more attention these days. One of the key things at play here is stress. When we experience chronic stress, our bodies are constantly on high alert, pumping out those fight-or-flight hormones, adrenaline, cortisol, all of those.
So it's not just about those sudden spikes in blood pressure when we're in a stressful situation. It's the cumulative effect of long-term stress that can really do damage.
Exactly. And it's not even just the stress itself, it's how we deal with it that really matters. Unhealthy coping mechanisms like smoking, drinking too much, overeating, those things can make the impact on our cardiovascular system even worse.
It's like a vicious cycle, isn't it?
Yeah.
Stress leading to bad habits, which then lead to high blood pressure and heart problems.
Precisely. And that's where the mental and emotional side of things comes in. Conditions like anxiety and depression, they can have a big impact on our blood pressure too.
Really? I wouldn't have necessarily made that connection. How does that work?
Well, people with anxiety and depression, they might be more likely to turn to those unhealthy coping mechanisms we were just talking about. Plus, their sleep patterns might be disrupted. And that can also contribute to higher blood pressure.
It sounds like it's all connected, doesn't it? All these different factors influencing each other, creating a really complex picture.
It really is. And besides those behavioral factors, there might even be physiological links between mental health and how our bodies regulate blood pressure. For example, there's some research that suggests inflammation, which is often elevated in people with depression, might play a role in the development of high blood pressure.
That's incredible. It really shows how closely linked our mental and physical health are. You can't really separate them, can you?
Definitely not. And this understanding, it's really changing how we think about prevention and treatment. In the past, we tended to treat mental health and physical health as completely separate things, but now we're realizing we need to take a more holistic approach.
So instead of just focusing on medication to lower blood pressure, we also need to address the underlying stress and anxiety.
Exactly. Things like regular exercise, mindfulness practices, getting enough sleep. Those things can make a huge difference for both our mental and physical health. And sometimes therapy or counseling might be helpful as well to help manage stress, anxiety, and depression.
It really does seem like taking care of our overall well-being is the best way to take care of our blood pressure too.
Absolutely. And this holistic approach, it's not just good for individuals, it's good for public health as a whole. By promoting mental well-being and healthy coping skills, we can potentially reduce the burden of high blood pressure and heart disease.
That's a really powerful thought, isn't it? We have a lot more control over our health than we sometimes realize.
Exactly. It all starts with awareness. When we understand the connection between our minds and our bodies, we can make better choices that support our overall well-being.
Olivia, this whole deep dive has been so eye-opening. I've learned so much, not just about the science of blood pressure, but about how deeply connected it is to our mental and emotional states.
It's been a pleasure talking with you too, Samuel. I hope everyone listening has found it as informative as we have.
I'm sure they have. And before we wrap up, I want to remind everyone that this is just the beginning. There's so much more to learn about blood pressure and heart health. So stay curious, keep learning, and be proactive about your health. Remember, even small changes can make a big difference over time.
That's so true, Samuel. It's all about taking those small steps toward a healthier you.
Well said. And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of blood pressure. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. We've been your hosts, Samuel Harrison and Olivia Harper. And you've been listening to the EMT-SPOT's Blood Pressure Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share this podcast with anyone who might find it helpful. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay well.